In the last class, we were discussing about orientation session. We discussed about the course outline and we discussed how the course will proceed. So today we are starting with our first topic, audit planning. And I hope that you all are motivated and committed to work hard from the very start. Okay. So we are starting with our first topic. And I want you all to copy along with me, maintain your registers and copy along with me so that you have your documented register, which will help you at the end of the session. Okay. I will also share the files on the Google Drive, but it is always beneficial that you have a register, which will be much more favorable for you to learn. Okay, so we are starting with our first topic, audit planning. So please, everyone, concentrate on it so that we can understand. Okay, now, when we talk about audit planning, we have 30 marks coming from this area in question number 1. And these are the confirmed marks. These are the marks which will come every time in examination. Okay, now in audit planning, we can have two types of question. One is risk evaluation, which can range from 20 marks to 25 marks. Okay. One portion is risk evaluation, which will range from 20 marks to 25 marks. And in it, we can have business risk evaluation. We can have risk of material misstatement evaluation. And the third thing which we can have is audit risk. Today we will start with business risk, audit risk. Okay. Now these all three risk evaluation will constitute 20 to 25 marks of your examination. Now, in AAA paper, the examiner will provide you a scenario and he will ask you to evaluate the risk from that given scenario. You have to evaluate the risk in that given scenario and you have to write according to the situation of the company. Okay. The examiner will not ask theoretical knowledge that what is business risk. He will not ask in this manner. He will not ask in the manner that what is risk of material misstatement or what is audit risk. He will ask that he will give you a scenario and then he will ask that evaluate the audit risk or evaluate the business risk or evaluate the risk of material misstatement in the given scenario. And in audit planning, the second area is audit planning theory, which will constitute 5 to 8 marks in your examination. Okay. In audit planning theory, we will discuss that what is audit planning. We will discuss that what is audit planning. We will discuss that what is audit strategy and what is audit program. Now, these are the two phases of audit planning activity. We will discuss the knowledge relating to these areas, audit strategy and audit program. We will discuss rules relating to materiality. Okay. We will discuss rules relating to risk evaluation. So these are all the areas which we will be discussing in audit planning. We will discuss that documents required for audit planning. Now, these all are the theoretical areas which are asked for 5 to 8 marks. Documents required for audit planning. So now, audit planning will constitute the first 30 marks. Audit planning will constitute the first 30 marks of our exam and it will be coming in the first question. And our first question will be of 50 marks. Our first question will be of 50 marks, in which the first 30 marks will be of audit planning area. In these first 30 marks, 20 to 25 marks will be related to risk evaluation and 5 to 8 marks will be related to audit planning theory. Okay. So now we are starting with our first topic in audit planning, which is business risk. Now, I want your full concentration so that you can understand. Now, business risk itself comes for like 10 to 12 marks within risk evaluation. Whenever the examiner gives business risk, he asks risk of material misstatement also along with it. So the business risk come from 10 to 15 marks in the examination, and the remaining marks of risk evaluation will be covered through risk of material misstatement. Like in part A, the examiner will give business risk, and in part B, the examiner will give risk of material misstatement. Now, what you need to understand is that the examiner will never ask to write a theoretical note on business risk. He will always provide you a scenario, and he will ask you to evaluate the business risks which are related to the company. Okay, so you will not be required to discuss the theoretical knowledge. You will have to evaluate business risk in a given scenario. You have to evaluate business risks in a given scenario. Okay. Now, first of all, my question is that what is a business risk? If I ask a basic question, that what is business risk about? So my answer will be that business risk is any factor which can affect the organization cash flows. It can affect the organization profitability. It can affect the organization liquidity position. So it includes any factor which can affect the cash flows, profitability, or the liquidity position of the company. Okay, just a minute. So we were talking that what is business risk. So now you need to remember that business risk is any factor which can affect the profitability of the company, or which can affect the cash flow position of the company, or we can call a liquidity position, or which can affect the business model of the company, the ongoing status of the company, business model of the company. Okay, now, what can be the examples of business risk if we discuss? Now, there can be an example of business risk that, for example, if organization is importing the key raw material, it is a business risk that due to exchange rate movement, its cost may rise. If organization is dependent on some employees, then if that employee leaves the company, it is a business risk. Import of raw material is a risk. Why import of raw material is a risk? Like if exchange rate moves adversely, if there are import duty, if there are lead time issues, dependency on any employee. If your key employee leaves your company, then it is a business risk that you are dependent on that employee. Or if any new regulation is introduced, that is a business risk for a company. Like we may not comply with that new regulation. Or think over it, what can be a business risk? High gearing, high debt is a business risk. Like we may not be able to repay the loan. Or the business risk can be like high fixed cost is a business risk. We may not be able to cover our fixed cost. Or the business risk can be loss of key customer. If our key customer will switch, then we may face losses. Or our business may also face a loss like due to a legal case filed. So what you need to understand is that business risk is anything which can affect my profitability, which can affect my cash flows, which can affect the liquidity position of the company, or in other words, which is harmful for my business, or anything which is causing a risk to my company will be regarded as a business risk. Any situation or any circumstance which can be harmful for my profits, which can be harmful for my business in long term. Like if I'm dependent on some customer, it's a business risk. Because if that customer will switch, then my business will not be sustainable. For example, if new regulation is introduced, it is a business risk that I may not be able to comply with that regulation. Or the competition in the market is a business risk. Loss of reputation is a business risk. Any factor which can affect my cash flows, any factor which can affect my profitability or my business model or the sustainability of my business will be regarded as a business risk. Now my question is that why business risk is important for auditor? Now see, business risk evaluation is important for auditor. Now see, business risk evaluation is important for auditor so that he can identify key factors which can affect the client's business, Now, why is it important? Which can affect the client's business. Now, let's discuss it. For example, you are an auditor. You need to know business risk because it will be helpful during going concern evaluation. It will be helpful while doing an impairment review, that you know the business risk of that client. Like you need to know that what are the factors which can affect the business of that entity. Because if those factors will materialize, it may lead to an impairment review. So what is business risk? It is any factor which can be harmful for the business of the client. It is any factor which can be harmful for his cash flows. And these factors will ultimately affect his going concern position, and they may lead to the impairment reviews. Okay. So being an auditor, it is very important for me to gain understanding of the client's business, his environment, the risk which are faced to his business, so that during audit, I can identify the factors which will lead to an impairment review, the factors which can lead to a going concern review. Okay. The factors for which we will need provisioning, the factors which will lead to fall in NRV of the inventory, the net realizable value of the inventory, because these business risks will in long term lead to impairment of assets, lead to going concern issues, lead to provisioning. They will lead to write down of inventory. So being an auditor, it is very essential to understand the business risk relating to the client. During audit planning phase, it is one of the essential phase that the auditor evaluate the business factors, the factors which can affect the business of the client in a harmful manner. Now, the most important thing is that what we have to do in the examination. In examination, you will be provided a scenario, and you have to evaluate the business risk from those scenarios. Now, see, it is very important that you listen to this part of the lecture very carefully. Now, if you are writing an examination, you need to understand that for each business risk, you will get 1.5 marks. For each business risk, you will get 1.5 marks for the explanation, for the evaluation. And if you have calculated any trend or any ratio, you will get 0.5 marks in addition. Now, please concentrate. 1.5 marks for a business risk and 0.5 marks for any evaluation or 0.5 marks for any trend or any ratio given. Now, maximum you can get 3 marks for calculation of trends. Now, if like, for example, if a student calculates too many trends, he calculates growth in everything, fall in everything. So the examiner will not give him 10 marks for the calculation. The maximum he can get is the 3 marks. The 3 marks is the maximum barrier which the examiner has kept on the calculation of trend. And these 0.5 marks will be in addition to 1.5 marks. Now, it's very important. These 0.5 marks will be in addition to the 1.5 marks given for the risk. Now, in every risk which you are writing, you have to write 3 things. Identify the risk from scenario. First of all, you have to identify the risk from scenario. You have to identify, okay, this is the risk. Like, for example, if we write a risk along with the discussion, for example, a company is importing the raw material. So what is the identification process? Now see, for example, ABC company faces exchange rate risk as it imports its raw material. Now see, this is the first sentence in which you identify the risk. That you identified the risk that ABC company faces the exchange rate risk. Now, if a student has identified the risk in the right manner, he will get 0.5 marks. What you need to make sure is that identification should be of one sentence. I didn't say one line, I said one sentence. So one sentence can be like 1.5 lines or 2 lines. So while writing the business risk, the first step is to identify the risk. The second step is to tell the impact of the risk. That what will happen if that risk materializes. Now see, what is the impact of exchange rate risk? See, if exchange rate moves adversely, then cost of raw material will rise. Which will reduce profit margins. Now, this is the impact that what will happen, which will reduce profit margins. Now, see, what you need to understand is that this first part of the risk was the identification part. Now, the second part of the risk is the impact part. When I have written the impact of the risk, that what if this risk materializes? Now, while writing the impact, if possible, now what I am saying, if possible, give a financial support also. If possible, give a financial support also. Now, what do you mean by financial support? Now, you can write here is that it can be observed that profit margins already declined from X percentage to Y percentage. Now, this part is called the financial support part. Now, see, what I'm trying to teach you is that I want to teach you like a small kid. I'm teaching you that how you have to construct the risk. What the students do is that they try to write the whole risk together. You can never write the whole risk together. First of all, you have to identify the risk. Then you have to write the impact. That what will happen if that risk gets materialized. If possible, give a financial support. And the third sentence of the risk will be an evaluative comment. Now, what is evaluative comment? My question is, what is evaluative comment? Evaluative comment means factors which increase or decrease that risk. Factors which increase or decrease that risk. Just a minute. Factors which increase or decrease the intensity of that risk. It would be a much better word. The intensity of that risk. That now you need to give an evaluative comment. Now, what do you mean by evaluative comment? Now, let's see. First of all, you identified the risk. That ABC company faces exchange rate risk as it imports its raw material. Now, what is the impact? If exchange rate moves adversely, then cost of raw material will rise, which will reduce the profit margin. Now, this is the impact. It can be observed that profit margins already declined from X percentage to Y percentage. Now, this is the financial support. Now, what will be the evaluative comment? Now, listen it carefully. For evaluative comment, you have to read the scenario. Like, for example, if it is written in the scenario that company do not use forward exchange contracts, then the evaluative comment will be that due to lack of forward exchange contracts, this risk is higher. Now, you don't need to give a hypothetical evaluation. You have to read the scenario. The examiner will provide the evaluative comment. Within the scenario, you need to identify it. Now, for example, if it is written, now I'm repeating it again. For example, if it is written in the scenario that company do not use forward exchange contracts, then my evaluative comment will be that risk is higher as company do not use forward exchange contracts, which results in exposure of company to exchange rate. Okay, beta, jab now if the company do not uses the forward exchange contract, therefore the risk is higher. Now see, I have written a risk of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 lines. But I didn't write the risk all together. My first sentence was the identification. My second sentence was the impact. And my third sentence was an evaluative comment. If you can give the financial support, it is very good. But if you cannot give a financial support, then also the risk will go on. But the three most important elements are the identification of risk, the impact of that risk, and the evaluative comment in that risk. What the student do is that they get hypothetical, that they deviate from the scenario and they start to write on their own. What you need to understand is that you need to focus on the scenario and you need to identify the risk from the scenario. You have to write the impact and you have to pick up the evaluative comment from the scenario, not from your own mind. Okay? I hope that you are getting the point. Now see, in AAA paper, it is very important that you know the writing approach. In each and every topic, there is a different writing approach. You cannot attempt all questions with the same approach. All topics with the same approach. The approach for business risk is different. The approach for risk of material misstatement will be different. And then the approach for audit risk will also be different. I hope you are getting the point. Okay. Now what we are trying to do is we will start with the first scenario so that you can have a better idea. But what I want from you is that you need to keep the approach, identify, impact, and evaluative comment in your mind and write each and every risk in this manner. Don't write in a haphazard manner. Follow the approach and soon you will learn the writing ability. Okay? Let's start with the first past paper question in this topic, which is Grohl Company. Now we will do multiple questions and with passage of time, you will get fluent in this area. But what I want from you is that you need to focus. You need to focus so that you can understand that how I am approaching this question. Okay, now. We are attempting the part 1, evaluate the business risk faced by Grohl Company, and this will give us 12 marks. Okay, now please concentrate that how I identify the risk and most importantly, how I draft the risk. Keep in mind, I'm repeating again, keep in mind that this scenario will not come again. This scenario will not come again. Only purpose of doing this question is to learn the technique of writing the risk. Okay? Only purpose is to learn the technique. So please focus on the technique, that how I identify the risk, and then most importantly, how I draft that particular risk. I want you to be concentrated and learn the technique to write. Okay, now you are a manager in Fu & Company responsible for the audit of Grohl Company, a company which produces circuit boards which are sold to manufacturers of electrical equipment such as computers and mobile phone. Now see, we make circuit boards. These circuit boards are sold to computers and mobile phone industry. Now you all know that computer and mobile phone industry is a technology industry. And in technology industry, there is always an inherent risk. There is always an inherent risk of innovation. Now let's think over the risk. Now one more important advice. What you people, what the students do in the exam is that they start writing the risk and they think the risk along with writing. They think over the risk along with writing the risk. Don't do this. It is much more advisable that before writing the risk, you should think over it. You should think over it first. I'm repeating again. Before writing the risk, before writing the risk, you should think over the risk first. Give 10 seconds or 15 seconds on planning the risk and then better write it. Don't write a risk in which you don't have a sufficient content. Only write a risk when you are confident enough that I will write a good risk. Okay? Now, computer and mobile phone industry is a technology industry. And you all know that technology industry keeps on innovation. So if the computer and mobile phone industry will innovate, automatically the circuit boards made by Grahal company will get outdated. The circuit boards made by Grahal company will get outdated. And if they will get outdated, Grahal company will face a fall in revenue and it has to invest in innovation process. Okay? Now, I have identified the risk, but at this point, I will not write it because obviously I don't have that much of data. So I will wait and I will read the question further. It is the first time that you have managed this audit client taking over from the previous audit manager, Bob Hallen, last month. The audit planning for the year ended 30th November 2012 is about to commence, and you have just received an email from Mia Y, the audit engagement partner. To audit manager from Mia Y audit partner, Fu and Company, subject is Grahal Company audit planning. Hello. I'm meeting with the other audit partners tomorrow to discuss the forthcoming audit and the related issues. I understand that you recently had a meeting with Mo Citriani, the finance director of Grahal. Using the information from your meeting, I would like you to prepare the briefing notes. Now I have 12 marks and my each risk gives me 1.5 marks. So this will give me 10 risk. I have to write 10 risk. So 10 into 1.5 will be 11.5 marks. So what about the last 0.5 marks? That last 0.5 marks will be gained through calculation of a trend. Okay? Now, let's move forward. Grahal Company's principal business activity remains the production of circuit boards. One of the key material used in the production is copper wiring, all of which is imported. Now, this is the same risk which I discussed earlier when I was discussing the technique. Now, when we discuss about imported, there are two risks. There is exchange rate exposure. There is exchange rate exposure. And the other problem is lead time. Because when you are importing from other country, there is always a risk that, like, due to a natural disaster, the goods may get delayed. As a cost-cutting measure, when you cut cost, always remember that there is risk to quality. When you cut your cost, always remember that there is a risk to quality. In April 2012, a contract with a new overseas supplier was signed, and all of the copper wiring is now supplied under this contract. So there is a cost-cutting measure, which is a risk to quality. There is a new supplier. There is all of the wiring. When you say all of the wiring, this is dangerous because you are getting dependent. Because you are getting dependent. Okay? Purchases are denominated in foreign currency. This will increase your risk. Now, this is the evaluative comment that exchange rate exposure is increasing because all purchases are denominated in foreign currency and the company does not use the forward exchange. Now, this is also an evaluative comment that the company don't use the forward exchange contract. So now this is our first question and we are reading it piece by piece and we are identifying the situation. It is always better that you read the whole question first. When you will read the whole question first, you will be in a better position to write good evaluations. Okay? But sometimes you may think that you can write some of the risk straight away. Like, for example, I think that I can write the risk of exchange rate exposure easily because I have sufficient point in form of denominated in foreign currency and the fact that the company does not use the forward exchange contract. Okay? Then all of the wiring is now supplied from the single supplier, which creates dependency, so that you can argue that in case of any dispute, we face a risk. You can write an evaluative comment that that supplier is new. We don't know anything about him. Now, first is that now all of the wiring is supplied from single person. It is itself a risk. That supplier is new. This increases the risk. That supplier is overseas. This also increases the risk. That as he lives in overseas, it is very difficult to file a case because there will be difference of laws between two countries. Okay? Now, let's read more. Let's see. Grohl company has two production facilities, one of which produces goods for the export market and the other produces goods for domestic market. About half of its goods are exported, but as export market is suffering from competition from cheaper producers overseas. Now, what do you mean by cheaper producers? Now, when you talk about cheaper producers, this means that this will force you to reduce your price also. And when you will reduce the price, you have to deploy the cost-cutting measures, and those cost-cutting measures will affect your quality. Most domestic sales are made under contracts with approximately 20 customers. Now, again, you can argue that 20 customers means a very small customer base. In case of any issue, if you lose any of the customer, it would be very dangerous for the company. Okay? Now we have read the start of this question. Let's write some risk and see where do we stand, whether we can write any point or not. Let's start and write some points. Now please concentrate and learn the approach that how I am drafting each and every risk. This will be very helpful for you so that you can understand that how you have to deal with the situation. Okay, now, when you are dealing with the question one, you have 4 professional marks also. Now, these 4 professional marks are divided in 2 heads. 2 marks for email format, like you have to make the format of the email, and 2 marks for overall flow of answer. What do you mean by overall flow of answer? That in how much good manner you develop your answer, the use of headings and the overall logical flow of the answer. So 2 marks are of the email format. So let's see that how we have to draft the email. Now, when you are writing the email, look at this. To audit manager from Miyawai audit partner Fu & Company, subject Grohl company audit planning. First of all, you have to substitute the to and from titles. The email was sent to us by Miyawai, so now we are replying to Miyawai. We are replying to Miyawai, who is the audit engagement partner audit engagement partner for Fu and Company. Just replicate it. Fu and Company. And from is the audit manager. Just substitute the to and from used by the examiner. Subject will be same as given in the question. Grohol Company audit planning. Grohol Company audit planning. And then you have to write the introduction. Now learn the technique that how I'm writing the introduction. You just need to follow it and change the names of the company. In relation to audit planning, for Grohol Company. Now every time you have to change the name of the company, okay? Like this time the name of the company is Grohol. In some other question it can be Julie or Cannoli or Sunshine or whatever the name is. For Grohol Company, for the year ended. Now see the year end given in the question. What is the year end? It's 30th November 2012. You have to change this year end also according to the question. For the year ended 30th November 2012. Following information is relevant. Information is relevant for evaluation of. Now, for evaluation of. Now, you have to identify the key word of each requirement. First requirement is business risk. Second requirement is risk of material misstatement. And third requirement is ethical issues. So you have to identify the keywords in every requirement for evaluation of business risks, comma, risks of material misstatements and ethical issues. Now, by making this format of the email, you have got 2 marks out of the 4 presentation marks or the 4 professional marks. You have to change the to and from, you have to write the subject, and then you have to write the introduction that in relation to audit planning for Grohol Company for the year ended 30th November 2012, following information is relevant for evaluation of business risk, risk of material misstatement, and ethical issues. Okay? So we are attempting the part A of the question, which is business risk. And we are writing the first risk, which is exchange rate risk. Now I want your full concentration that how I'm developing the risk. First of all, we have to identify the risk. Now, how to identify the risk? The identification is that Grohol Company imports the key raw material. And when you import the key raw material, you face a risk of exchange rate. Grohol Company faces a risk of exchange rate, movement as it imports key raw material. So now this is the identification part. Now what will be the impact of this risk? Will anyone tell me? If exchange rate moves adversely, then cost of import will rise, which will reduce profit margins. So this is the impact part. Okay, now this is the impact part. Now, if you can give financial support, you should. Now, from where I can get the financial support? Now, this is my question. I haven't read any financial data yet. But if you go on other page of the question, you can get the draft statement of comprehensive income. If you calculate a profit margin, then let's see what is the profit margin. Like it's 500 divided by 12,500. So it's 4%. And if I divide 1,000 divided by 13,800, so this gives me 7.2%. So I can give a financial support. Now, what will be the financial support? Profit margins have already declined. Profit margins have already declined from 7.2% to 4%. You have identified the risk, you have given the impact, you have given the financial support, and now you need to give the evaluative comment. What will be the evaluative comment? Risk is higher as purchases are denominated in foreign currency and company do not uses forward exchange contract. So now this is the evaluative comment which shows that risk is higher. Now see, don't look that I have written a risk of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 lines. I don't write 10 lines together. I first of all wrote the first 2.5 lines in which I identified the risk. Then the 3 lines in which I gave the impact of the risk. Then a 1.5 line in which we gave financial support. And then an evaluative comment in which we discussed that why the risk is higher. Now see, how many marks? Now you don't need to write the marks in the exam, obviously. 1.5 marks for the risk, and you have calculated some profit margins, so you will get additional 0.5 marks. In total, you will get 2 marks for this risk. So if you calculate any ratio, then you will get additional 0.5 marks for that. Okay? So we have written the first risk, the exchange rate risk. Now, if we will read the question further, we may find some more good points also. Like you identified the risk of cost-cutting measures. That cost-cutting measure is a risk of quality. Now you can find some good points relating to quality also. Like in if we read the complete question, we have a reference of an accident. We will have a reference of an accident. So obviously, if we'll write risk to quality earlier, we will not be able to give the reference of that accident. So in some risk, you can write while reading the question, while in some you should write at the end. So obviously a student asks that how can I know that whether there will be some information relating to that risk in future or not? Okay. So you need to understand is that it is always better that you should read the whole question first before writing the risk. Okay. Now, let's write one more risk, which is lead time, because we are importing the raw material. So we face the risk of lead time also. Like if the raw material will get delayed, then this will create impact of lead time, like our production may get affected. Now see, how to write this risk? As we are importing the raw material, so there is a risk of lead time. Now, please concentrate on the approach that how I write the risk. First of all, I will identify the risk. Grohl company faces a risk of production delays. As it imports the raw material. So now this is the identification element, where I have identified the risk that it faces a risk of production delays as it imports the raw material. Now, what will be the impact? If due to any natural disaster, copper supply will get delayed, then production will be affected. And Grohl company will not be able to meet customer orders. So now this is the impact. Will not be able to meet customer orders. So I have identified the risk that as we import the raw material, we face the risk of production delays due to lead time matter. As it imports the raw material, so the production may get delayed. If the raw material comes late, if due to any natural disaster, copper supply will get delayed, then production will be affected and Grohl company will not be able to meet customer orders. Now give an evaluative comment. Why this risk is higher? Risk is higher as raw material which is imported is key raw material, that it was the key raw material. Circuit board cannot be made. Without which circuit board cannot be made. Now I have one more very good evaluative comment. Now you can write that as per the contract with the supplier, we cannot purchase the copper from someone else. If you remember, as per the contract with supplier, we cannot purchase the copper from someone else. And this means that if there is a delay in the supply of copper, the only option we have is to wait, because we cannot purchase it from someone else, because we read in the question that as per the contract, all of the copper will now be supplied from this vendor. Are you getting the point? So you need to understand the approach, that how I'm writing the risk, how I'm developing my point. Identify, impact, and an evaluative comment. Okay. Now, let's write one more risk, that all of the copper is now supplied from single vendor. So we can argue that there is a risk of dependency. We are getting dependent on this supplier. Dependency on supplier. Let's see. Dependency on supplier. Let's see. Just a minute. Okay, so let's start. So we were writing dependency on supplier. Now, Grohl company is importing, or is purchasing all of its key raw material from single supplier, which creates a risk of dependency. Which creates a risk of dependency. Okay. So now, the first part of the risk is identification of the risk. Now let's write the second part. What will be the impact? In case of any dispute with supplier, or any delays caused by supplier, Grohl company faces a risk of production halt, because as per contract, it cannot purchase from any other supplier. So the impact is that if there is any dispute or delays caused by this supplier, Grohl company is stuck and it has to wait for this supplier only. Now, the identification part is that as it is bound to purchase raw material from single supplier, it creates a risk of dependency. The impact is that if there is any delay due to dispute or due to any production problem faced by this supplier, Grohl company have to halt its production. What will be the evaluative comment? Risk is higher. Now, why risk is higher? As this supplier is new. Now, when the supplier is new, you don't know that what is his position. Is new and it is located in overseas. Therefore, if any political issue arises, between two countries, then also Grohl company production will be affected. Now see, I'm repeating it. Now you are bound to purchase from this single supplier. If due to political issues, the trading between the two countries suspend, or it gets paused, or it gets delayed, then Grahak company will have no other option than to wait for this supplier, because as per contract, the Grahak cannot purchase from anyone. Or maybe it has to wait for some time, or maybe it has to wait for some time before finding a new supplier, because it needs a reasonable cause if it wants to change the supplier. So now see, first of all, I identified the risk of dependency. Then I wrote the risk, the impact of that risk, that due to this risk, our production will get halted. And the evaluative comment is that as this supplier is located in overseas country, in some other country, therefore there is a risk that due to political issues also, the production may get affected. Okay, getting the point. Now, there is one more risk, that half of our goods are exported. That half of the goods are exported, and export market is suffering due to competition from cheaper producers overseas. Now let's read more. In early November 2012, the production was halted for a week at the production facility which supplies the domestic market. Now the production was halted, and you know that domestic market is only of 20 customers, and you halted the production. When you halted the production, this means that some of your customers may switch, because your production is halted. A number of customers had returned goods, claiming faults in the circuit board supplied. Now, on inspection, it was found that copper used in the circuit board was corroded. Now, if you remember that we have changed the copper wiring supplier as a cost-cutting measure. So when you are writing the risk of cost-cutting measure, you can refer this incident, that this happened in November 2012, that the new supplier sent you the corroded copper used in the circuit board was corroded and therefore unsuitable for use. The corrosion is difficult to spot as it cannot be identified by eye and relies on electrical testing. All customers were contacted immediately, and where necessary, the products were recalled and were replaced. The corroded copper remaining in the inventory has been identified and separated from rest of the copper, but still I will say that this will affect your reputation, because you have supplied something wrong to the customers. Okay, so now let's write some risk. First risk which I'm writing is cost-cutting measure, because this was the risk which I identified earlier, but I didn't wrote at that time, because I said that I will refer this incident. Cost-cutting measure. Now, risk to quality of Grahak company products. Risk to quality of Grahak company products is faced as it changed its key supplier in a cost-cutting measure. So in the first sentence, I have identified the risk. That risk to quality of Grahak company products is faced as it changed its key supplier in a cost-cutting measure. Now, what will be the impact? If copper supplied is low quality, then Grahak company circuit boards will face issues as copper is the key raw material. It was written that copper is key raw material. This will affect Grohl company's reputation. This will affect Grohl company's reputation. Now you have to give the evaluative comment. Now, in evaluative comment, you can refer the incident which happened. This risk materialized during the year. This risk materialized during the year. When in November 2012, faulty circuit boards were supplied due to corroded copper. So now this will be the evaluative comment because you have referred an incident which has occurred during the year. Now I'm repeating again and again that you need to understand my writing technique. In the first sentence, I gave an identification of the risk. That risk to quality of Grohl company products is faced as it changes its key supplier in a cost-cutting measure. What will be the impact? If copper supplied is low quality, then Grohl company circuit boards will face issues as copper is the key raw material. This will affect Grohl company's reputation. This will affect Grohl company's reputation. This risk materialized during the year when in November 2012, faulty circuit boards were supplied due to corroded copper. Okay? So, we wrote this risk of cost-cutting measure also. Now, moving forward towards the export market, which is suffering competition from cheaper producers overseas. Now, let's write this risk. Now, the risk is cheaper producers in overseas. Now let's identify the risk. What is the risk? Due to cheaper overseas producers, Grohl company may face loss of market share. Now this is the identification of the risk. You may face loss of market share. Why you will face loss of market share? You will face a loss of market share. You will face a loss of market share because there are cheaper producers in overseas who will affect your market. Now, what will be the impact of this risk? Due to cheaper producers, Grohl company has to deploy further cost-cutting measures to reduce its price also. This will affect its quality. This will affect its quality. Now, I am giving a financial support. Revenue has already declined. Revenue has already declined. Now see, if you can see, our revenue has declined from 13,800 to 12,500. 12,500 divided by 13,000. So it is, our revenue has declined by 9.4%. Revenue has already declined by 9.4%, which may fall further due to competition. Now you need to understand that how I am developing the risk. Now see, first of all, I have identified the risk. Due to cheaper overseas producers, Grohl company may face loss of market share. Due to cheaper producers, Grohl company has to deploy further cost-cutting measures to reduce its price also. This will affect its quality. Revenue has already declined by 9.4%, which may fall further due to competition. Now, what will be the evaluative comment? Think over it. I have a very good evaluative comment. Now, what will be that evaluative comment? Now, see. Falling profit margins. Falling profit margins. Now, see. Falling profit margins of Grohl company will affect its ability to reduce further prices. I hope you have got the point. In order to remain competitive. Now, already your profit margins have declined from 7% to 4%. If you will reduce your prices further, this will soon lead to a loss-making situation. So see how I have developed the risk. First of all, I have identified the risk that due to cheaper producers, Grohl company faces a risk of loss of market share. Now, what is the impact? Due to cheaper producers, Grohl has to deploy further cost-cutting measures to reduce its price. This will affect its quality. Now, revenue has already declined by 9%, which may fall further due to the competition. And falling profit margins of Grohl will affect its ability to reduce further prices in order to remain competitive. Okay. Now, so we have written the exchange rate exposure, we have written lead time, we have written dependency, we are done with cost-cutting measure, we are done with export market. So we have written almost 5 risks. Now let's write one more risk. Let's talk about this incident which has happened. That you have supplied the wrong goods. Or you can also refer the fact that the domestic market is just dependent on 20 customers. Okay? Now see. Let's write an easy one. Faulty goods supplied. Now let's identify the risk. Now what is the risk here? Due to faulty goods supplied, Grohl company faces a risk of loss of reputation. The company faces a risk of loss of reputation. Now, what will be the impact? Customers who were supplied with faulty circuit boards, with faulty circuit boards may not be willing or may be reluctant to deal with Grahal company in future. This will lead to decline in revenue. Our revenues will decline. Okay. Now let's give an evaluative comment. Now what will be the evaluative comment? Issue was mitigated. Now see how I'm writing the evaluative comment. Issue was mitigated during the year. Just a minute. Issue was mitigated during the year by recall of products. But as the market of domestic customers is only of 20 customers, but as market of domestic customer only consists of 20 customers, therefore risk is higher. Now see how I have written the risk. I have identified that there is a risk of loss to reputation. There is a risk of loss to reputation. The impact is that the customers will be reluctant and our sales will decline. The evaluative comment is that as the market is very small, the risk is higher, but we have mitigated the risk by some extent. That we have recalled the customer, we have recalled the faulty products. Okay. So there is one more issue, that we will face loss of inventory. Because he has said that we have separated the corroded copper and we have recalled the products. So, company will face loss of faulty circuit boards which were recalled from customers. So this is the risk that company will face loss of faulty circuit boards which were recalled from customers. Now what is the impact? The impact of risk is this inventory loss will reduce profit margins further if new supplier do not accept his mistake in corrosion, his mistake in supplying corroded copper. If that new supplier will not accept his mistake, then obviously the all loss will fall on Grahal company. Company will face loss of circuit boards which were recalled from customers. This inventory loss will reduce profit margins further if new supplier do not accept his mistake in supplying the corroded copper. Now, what is the evaluative comment? Can anyone tell me? Let's see. Oh, 1 minute. On inspection, it was found. That copper used in the circuit board was corroded and therefore unsuitable for use. The corrosion is difficult to spot. It cannot be identified by eye and relies on electrical testing. So you can write an evaluative comment that not only the inventory is getting wasted, we have to incur an additional expense on electrical testing of the circuit boards. This will increase our expense further. All customers were contacted immediately, and where necessary, the products were recalled and replaced. The corroded copper remaining in the inventory has been identified and separated from the rest of the copper. So if the supplier will not accept his mistake, then Grahal has to face a loss. Now, my evaluative comment is loss. Grahal company has to bear additional cost of electrical testing for identifying faulty circuit boards which is an additional cost along with inventory loss, which is an additional cost along with inventory loss. Inventory loss is one cost. Another cost is that you have to make an expense on electrical testing also. Are you getting the point? So we have identified the risk of faulty circuit boards. We have written the impact. This loss will reduce the margins. And we have given an evaluative comment that identifying the circuit board relies on electrical testing, which will increase our cost further. So we have written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 risks. Let's read more and identify the further risk. Now see, work has recently started on a new production line which will ensure that Grahal company meets new regulatory requirement prohibiting the use of certain chemical which comes into force in March 2013. Now what is my year end? My year end is November 2012 and the new regulation will come into effect in March 2013. Now, whenever there is a new regulation, there is a risk of non-compliance. There is always a risk of non-compliance. Okay, so let's see. Non-compliance. Now, I want you people to be alert. Non-compliance. Grahal company faces a risk. Grahal company faces a risk of non-compliance to new regulations which will become applicable which will become applicable 4 months after year end. So you face a risk that you may not be able to comply. Now, what is the impact? If you will not be able to comply, what will happen? Yes, your license may get suspended. You may be required to stop your production because it relates to the production line. Production of Grahal company may suspend temporarily if it fails to meet the new regulatory requirement relating to production line. Now see, I have written the risk, that the risk is of non-compliance. I have written the impact, that the impact will be that our production may suspend if we fail to meet regulations relating to the production line. Now, what will be the evaluative comment? The evaluative comment is that we have just recently started the work on new line. And this shows that we are apparently too late to meet the regulation, because just think that this regulation will come into effect in 4 months and you have just started to work on the new line. You need to do the testing phase and you need to pass through all the demos and the trials. So, risk is higher. Now see my evaluative comment. Risk is higher that Grahal company may not be able to meet with the regulatory requirement immediately after it becomes applicable, as it has recently started to work on it, and it is just 4 months remaining in application date. Are you getting my point? 4 months remaining in application date. So my evaluative comment is that there is a very high chance that you will not be able to meet the regulatory requirement soon after it gets applicable. Why? Because you have just started working on the line. So our first risk was exchange rate, second risk was lead time, third was dependency on supplier, fourth was a cost-cutting measure, fifth risk was cheaper producers, sixth was faulty goods, and seventh was loss of inventory. And now we are on the risk of non-compliance, that there is a very high risk that we may not be able to comply with the new regulatory requirement because we have recently started working on that new production line. Okay, let's see, we need to write 2 more risks. In July 2012, a new loan of $30 million with an interest rate of 4% was negotiated with the bank. The main purpose of the loan being to fund the capital expenditure necessary for the production line. So we have taken a loan of 30 million. Now you all know that when we take a loan, there is a risk of bankruptcy, there is a risk of greater covenants, there is a risk of increase in finance cost. So it's always risky to take a loan. Let's see the financial position of the company on the next page. It shows that Grohl company is already in a loss of 300,000. And if you have taken a loan of $30 million at 4%, so $30 million into 4% means an additional burden of 1.2%, of 1.2 million. And you have taken a loan to develop a new production line. Now listen to it very carefully. You have taken the loan to develop a new production line, which will just meet the regulatory requirement. It will not add any value to the business. It is just meeting the new regulatory requirement, which means that by meeting the regulatory requirement, we will not generate any incremental revenues. Listen to it very carefully. We are not expanding the business. We are just investing on the new regulatory requirement, new production line, so that it meets the regulatory requirement. This means that due to this investment, the profits are not growing, but the finance cost will increase by 1.2 million. And if you read the Grohl company, the draft SOP has not yet been prepared, but most states that the assets are 180 million, cash at bank is 130,000, current ratio is 1.1, and quick ratio is 0.8. Cash balance of 130,000 is very low because in 1 year you are creating a loss of 300,000. Current ratio of 1.1 and quick ratio of 0.8 is just on our borders. It's just on borders. They are not the good ratios. So let's write risk number 9, the new loan which the company is taking. Now, new loan of $30 million creates a risk of additional interest cost, creates a risk due to additional interest cost burden. If Grohl company will not be able to pay its interest cost, then bank will impose additional covenants. Now the examiner says that students are in a too much hurry to bankrupt a company. Don't write that company will be bankrupted. It is better to write that it will not be able to pay its interest cost, then bank will impose additional covenants. Interest cost on new loan is 1.2 million because $30 million is the loan amount and 4% is the interest rate. Interest cost on new loan is 1.2 million, which is a burden for company considering its loss. For the year. So it's a burden. Now, can you give me an evaluative comment? What will be the evaluative comment? You can write an evaluative comment that due to this new loan, the company is developing a production line which will not generate any additional revenues. So the risk is higher that Grahal company will not be able to support the additional interest payments. New loan will be used to develop a production line which meets the new regulation. Which means that it's not an expansion, rather it is a compliance issue. No additional profits will be generated. To pay additional interest burden. Obviously, we are not doing any expansion. We are just meeting the compliance matter. We are just meeting the compliance issue. So if we are not getting any additional profits, how can we support this additional interest cost? So you can write it as an evaluative comment. So see, whatever risk I'm writing is that I'm writing it in 3 steps. I'm identifying the risk, I'm writing its impact, and I'm giving an evaluative comment to the examiner. So that examiner can understand that my risk is complete and it meets the assessment objectives which are expected by the examiner. Okay, are you getting the point? Now, $2.5 million of the loan represents an overdraft which was converted into long-term finance. If you read it carefully and you understand it, if a company is converting its long-term finance, its overdraft in long-term finance, it is an indicator that company is in liquidity issues. Why? Because when you convert your OD into long-term finance, this shows that you were not able to pay the overdraft on time. That's why you are requesting the bank to convert it into a long-term finance. The company's request, the company's conversion of OD into long-term finance shows that it was not able to pay its OD on time, which shows its liquidity issues. The liquidity issue can also be seen from the low cash balance of $130,000 as compared to a loss of $300,000. Current ratio and quick ratio are already on border. So now see, now this is a risk of liquidity. Now, this is not a normal risk. When you write these type of risk, you don't use the normal approach. Now, this is the risk which will work on facts. You will not follow the same approach of identify, impact, and evaluation in it. You will just argue that liquidity issues exist. Because liquidity issue itself is a business risk. You just need to argue that why liquidity issues exist. Now, as Grahal company converted its OD to long-term finance. Therefore, it can be argued that company is facing liquidity issues, as a result of which it was not able to repay its OD and had to convert OD to a long-term loan. Now see, through my argument, I am proving that the company is facing a liquidity issue. And liquidity issue itself is a business risk. I don't need to write anything else if a liquidity issue exists. Now see, another support. This liquidity issue can also be identified from fact. That cash balance is just $130,000 against a loss for year of $300,000. This means that your cash balance is also low. Current ratio and quick ratio. Of 1.1 and 0.8 respectively are at acceptable level. Obviously 1.1 is a okay ratio, are at acceptable level, but further decline may create a risk, may indicate liquidity crisis. Because if your current ratio falls below 1, then this means that you don't have sufficient current assets to pay off your current liabilities. Now see, this point of liquidity issues was not a normal point. I have argued different things in it. I have tried to prove that yes, the company is facing the liquidity issues. It is in the alarming situation because it was not able to pay its OD. Its cash balance is low and current ratio and quick ratio are also on borderline. Okay. So now we have completed the 10 business risks which we were required to write. In each risk, I have tried to identify you the approach that how I am developing the risk. What you need to understand is that this scenario, this question will not come again. But if you know the approach that how I was writing the risk, then obviously you would be in much better position in the exam. Okay, so we wrote 5 risks here, and then we wrote 5 risks here. Now we have still not written the risk of technology. You can also write the risk of technology, but the Grohl company has to continuously invest on innovation. If it fails to invest, then the mobile phone and computer industry will innovate and Grohl company circuit boards will become outdated. You can give an evaluative comment that considering the Grohl company's loss for the year and low cash balances, it may not be able to invest on innovation. Okay, let's read the question further. Several of the Grohl Company executive directors and financial controller left in October 2012. So you can argue a risk of loss of key management personnel. Your strategic team has left to set up a company in recycling of old electronic equipment. This new company is not considered to be in competition with Grohl. The directors left on good terms and replacement for directors have been recruited. So now you can say that the risk is not too much essential because the company has hired the replacement directors already. One of the food company audit manager, Bob Hallen, is being interviewed for the role of financial controller. Bob is a good candidate for this position as he developed good knowledge of Grohl Company's business when he was managing the audit. At Grohl Company most recent board meeting, the audit fees was discussed. The board members expressed concern over the size of the fees. Given the company's loss for the year, the board would like to know that whether the audit can be performed on contingent fees. Now, all of these are ethical issues. That our audit manager is being hired at the client, it is an ethical issue. Contingent fees is an ethical issue. Obviously, these are not the business risk. And then we have the income statement, which we have already read. So we have drafted the first answer of our business risk. Now, if I sum up my first class, we started the first chapter today of audit planning in which we were discussing business risk. We have tried to learn the approach that how we have to write the risk. Okay. Now, what I expect from you people is that you should read the examiner answer of this question. You can simply search on Google, or you can refer your booklets for the answer of Grohl Company and read the examiner answer and marking scheme and try to learn some additional points also. In next class, we will be doing one more question so that we can understand the approach in much more better manner. Okay? With passage of time, you will feel more comfortable. This is our first question. We will do 3 more questions of business risk and then I will give you the homework. Okay? So I hope that you people will read the examiner answer and make some evaluations. Okay? Thank you. See you all tomorrow.